Okay, guys, welcome to the Why Networks Work coming up for air. And we thank you, each one of you guys, for being here. We're honored to have Dr. Steve Hopkins with us. Steve's been a friend for a long time. He's the resource group leader for the Bible Teaching and Leadership Resources Group at the State Convention of Baptists in Ohio. Steve has his doctorate from the Southern Baptist Theological Seminary, right? Am I getting that right, Steve? And also a degree from Georgetown College, where we had a chance to meet several years ago. He's pastored several churches and has been in his role in the SCBO for many years, over 20, I believe. And he's been a real help to me, being able to always be ready to respond. Steve, I think you played football at Georgetown College. I never played football at on the college level. I did in high school, and I played center, and this actually ties in. But one of the things that I did after every play is I had to figure out where 10 yards was behind where the football was spotted. I had to raise my arm and yell huddle at the top of my lungs. And if I didn't, all the other players kind of griped. It was like, what's going on with you, bud? And at any rate, I was able to get everybody together so we could call the play and be able to. My junior and senior year, I played center, was our first winning seasons in my little town where we were. So I'm sure my being center had something to do with it. I joke that I'm a center saved by grace. And at any rate, we see that the importance of a huddle. That may be going a long way, but I'm glad you're here today. We are finding that huddles work really well for pastors. We call them regional meetings here in the Cincinnati Area Baptist Association. I know that we have gotten down to now 7 different regions. If anybody's watching or doesn't have one of these, I sent it out early this morning. It's our CABA map of where our churches are, and there are 7 regions, and each one of these 7 regions has a convener to call together guys each month. And that's kind of an introduction of where we are. Steve, talk to us a little bit of your background and what brought you into taking a look at the value of having these huddles or these network meetings with pastors, and what you would see as how they're helpful with CABA pastors as well and church staff.
Sure. First of all, a quick little clarification. You said I played football on a college level. I was on a team. When I got the college ball, I was small, and I made up for it by being slow. So you know, I was there, but that was about it. So,
okay.
But it is really sweet to be with you guys, familiar faces, and good to be able to be a part of what's going on. And a quick introductory as to why networks, and then I'm going to share screen in a minute if I can, and show you. I've got put it together a little bit of a couple of graphics to help us see it. But you know, when I started this work a long time ago in a faraway galaxy, but when I started this work, our role was more of a consultant role. And I drove around the state, meeting guys for lunch, meeting them for breakfast, and finding out what their need was. And then I'd go out and pop my trunk and hand them a box from Lifeway and say, here, add water and stir. and that was kind of the model that we used for trying to help churches. It was all a sense of you know, just what's the right program and how you can plug and play programs. And that's who we were. And I discovered real early on that was not what we needed to be doing. Number one, churches nowadays, you guys got all the resources you need. I mean, with the internet, you can get on there and type in your sermon title and get 10 titles, 10 outlines to go with it or whatever. and the resources are available. But what I discovered soon was that what guys needed was not so much a new resource, but how to apply that resource in their context. That makes sense, guys. I mean, I literally can tell you stories, true stories of guys that went off to Saddleback and Willow Creek, and I'm not against those places. God has used those places to do great things. Or they went down to Andy Stanley or wherever else you pick, whatever's the guy for this month, and brought back wonderful ideas. But what works in Southern California doesn't always work in Ohio. You know, it was amazing to me to look around back in the early 90s and see how many guys were wearing Hawaiian shirts with no socks and thought that was the key to making their church grow, you know. And so I really found out that we need to get in this thing and really see some change take place through understanding our context. And so in light of, and you guys just unmute and stop me at any point in time. I'm going to try to share screen here with you. And it says the host needs to allow me to do that. So if you can allow me to do that. I got the button there, but and if it doesn't work, we can go without it. But
I'm looking for anything on mine, and I don't see how to do that.
Okay.
Let me. I think it just allows me to look at mine.
Yeah, that's yours. Okay. So let's see what. Yeah, it says you have disabled the attendee screen sharing. So, okay, I guess I won't share screen.
Hang on. Try it again.
Okay. Yes, it's allowing me to do it now. I think so.
Great.
Okay.
Found it.
Okay, let's see. I think it's coming. Here we go. All right, that that's still not showing up though, is it, guys? Let's see what happens here when I. All right, you're not seeing screen yet. One more time here with feeling. Have you got it now?
Yes.
Yep.
Ah, wonderful. Okay, good deal. Thanks. Appreciate your patience, guys. Here's just a couple of principles that I think are key for understanding why we do networks. The number one principle I call the transformational principle. We're about seeing lives changed and communities changed for the glory of God. And to do that, it's got to start in our own hearts and lives. That first statement there, some of you guys have heard me say this over and over again. Personal renewal must precede corporate renewal. You see, I find a lot of times guys are saying, how can I change my church? And they're not asking the question, how do I change me? And so it's got to start with personal renewal, because life change brings about life change. And so it's not about just going in and changing the structure of the church. It's about me going through those changes, and changed people can courageously change structure. And so because we are leading transformation, it's bigger than just a box that we can hand you. It's bigger than just a step-by-step, here's 5 steps to making your church grow. It's got to be more than that. It's got to be transformational. It's got to start with us experiencing that kind of transformation. And so that's the first principle then the leadership principle, and you guys know this, leadership is influence and investment. I know some people that make a whole lot more money than I make and are a whole lot smarter than I am, just use leadership as influence. But I really see that if we're going to lead people, we've got to invest in them. And it's a character issue. It's being and doing, not just doing. And so in order for me to invest in others, I got to have somebody investing in me. And so that effective leadership will flow from who you are, and it's a capacity for expansion ratio that needs to be built into our lives. And we all have got incredible capacity because the Lord Jesus Christ lives in our hearts and lives, and His presence and the power of His Holy Spirit gives us incredible capacity. But I think sometimes to understand that capacity, then we need someone investing in us to show us how that capacity is working. And so that leadership principle is absolutely critical. The third principle is that synergy principle, where we just come to understand that change happens best in the context of relationships. The old adage they talk about, with real estate, the three most important things is location, location, location. Well, the three most important things for leadership is relationships, relationships, relationships. And of course, it starts with our relationship with the Lord Jesus Christ, and then it overflows in our relationships with those that we lead, and relationship places where we can deepen our character, clarify our calling, sharpen our competencies, and gain courage, create that kind of synergy that allows us to lead the way God has called us to lead. Let me stop there for a second. And anybody push back? I feel free to push back or challenge or affirm or whatever you got a word on any of those three things? And you got to unmute to do that. So.
I just want to share something real quick, if I could. That you were talking about change. I'm just wondering, in the context of some of our traditional churches, I know that change needs to happen internally, and I know that's what you're focusing on. But at the same time, when we think about in the church, I'm hearing church structure change, and I'm asking myself the question sometimes lately: do we need to think inside the box in some of our more traditional churches, and change, but change within the structure?
You're exactly right. Yeah.
Sometimes, no. Does that work better sometimes in some contexts, maybe?
No, I think you're exactly right. And if you'll hold on just a second, because one of the things I want to share is, and I think you're right on track, David. It's the culture of the church that needs to change. And does that make sense? And I've actually got that built in here because I think you're right on track, and maybe I should have gone to that earlier, but yeah.
When we take a look at networks on these, Steve, when we're taking a look at the change personally, are we talking about bringing that change to, are you going to talk about bringing that change to when our huddles get together, when our pastors get together, when networks form? Okay.
Right. So let's just jump onto that, and again, stop me at any point. See, here's a great quote from Reggie McNeil, and some of you are familiar with him. He wrote the book Revolution in Leadership, and he says the days are gone when there's enough expertise can be leveraged into ministry situations through traditional channels of seminars, books, tapes, etc. Church leaders are facing challenges that arise so quickly, and he wrote this before COVID. So I mean, you just insert there COVID, and it makes all kinds of sense. They arrive so quickly, and on such a huge, broad scale that we cannot learn enough or fast enough on our own. And so he goes on to say then that we need partners who are facing similar ministry challenges. And there's a need for this peer mentoring that he's talking about, the power of a learning community, whether you call it a network or a huddle or regional meetings. It's a group of, and in his terminology, a group of colleagues who come together in a spirit of mutual respect, authenticity, learning, and shared responsibility to continue to explore and articulate an expanding awareness and a base of knowledge. I mean, he couches that in more formal language than I would use, but yes, I think that's what we're talking about. And so we're creating that kind of place where we can come and be challenged where we need to be challenged, but we can learn and we can share, and we build that kind of peer mentoring that takes place. So if you're familiar with J. Robert Clinton and his writing, he talks about the need for a mentoring constellation, and he talks about how a mentoring constellation, you have somebody that's further along than you, that's a mentor to you, and so that person is helping you. It's kind of a Paul-Timothy relationship, and then we build mentors, that people that we are mentoring. And again, if you put Timothy down here now and Paul, Paul is bringing Timothy along. So in my life, what Clinton says is that I need somebody who's mentoring me, and I need to be mentoring somebody else. But then I think one of the genius of what he writes is we need some, what he calls co-mentors. We need people who are on the same level with us, that we're learning together, and we can be an encouragement to one another, and so you look for those kinds of people that you share. I've got a group of those folks in mind, and he's going to talk about, when he talks about external co-mentors and internal co-mentors. External are people that are outside of your daily walk and path, and internal are people that you see every day. So some of you may even have the grace and the fortunate value of having somebody like that in your church, somebody that you can meet. I had when I pastored, wonderful deacons that I could go to them and we could close the door and we could just sit and walk through things and learn. Those were internal co-mentors. But then I also needed that external co-mentor that could see from the outside some blind spots that we had on the inside. And so those became that kind of peer mentoring or learning community, as Reggie McNeil talks about it. And so he talks about, and this is what we see in your regional networks, the empowerment, which is the exchange of relevant resources. So you come together and you're talking about something's going on in your life of your church, and somebody down the road has been doing something very similar, and they say, well, this worked really well for us, and so you can exchange some relevant resources. Then there's that accountability that builds into it, that we follow through on the implementation of change. I don't know about you, but one of the things I've seen over and over and over again is some guys got some great ideas about change, but they don't follow through with the implementation. So if I know I'm going to be meeting with a guy next month and he's going to ask me, hey, how did that go? It's encouragement for me to implement what I've been talking about doing. And then this third one is just a huge thing, I think, in today's world, is some safe place environments where we can capture and explore the deeper work God's doing in our hearts. A place where guys can come together and they know it's a safe place. They know that what they share is not going to be on Twitter the next day and or any place else. And so that just becomes huge when I've got that kind of safe place that I can be there, and where a guy can, we can build some trust. And where a guy can look at me and I can tell him what happened the day before, And I trust him well enough that he can say to me, well, that was a dumb thing to do. You know, and he may say it more kindly than that, but he can tell me that, well, how would we have maybe should have done that differently? But you gotta have a trust level to be able to do that. I mean, I just don't, you know, if I walk in with some of you that I don't know as well and say to you, I think you're doing things all wrong, you may say, well, there's the door, you know, and by the way, you just lost my cooperative program giving or whatever. I don't, you know, but if you got somebody that you build a relationship with and you've been meeting with on a regular basis, you've been even breaking bread together, and you've been doing some fun things together, you've been lugging around inflatables together or whatever it might be, then you got some trust level that you can share. And so that's what I see taking place in these networks. Let me just show you a quick illustration, and then I'll pull up again for air, as we say. So I see those kind of three things taking place. When these networks meet, there is some content. We're not just meeting just to have coffee. I mean, if you just want to get together with somebody and have coffee, that's one thing. It's not that we're just getting together for fellowship. Fellowship's important and good, but these things are more than just fellowship. There's content. Then there's got to be that character aspect where we're really thinking deeply with one another about the character issues of life. I'm reading James Merritt's book right now, Character Still Matters, and he just is so dead on with some of the things. Our world needs to see good, solid character, who we need to be. And then, and I'm using the word coaching here, you if that may not communicate to you, but it's that coming alongside one another, helping one another know how their character and how we implement content together. And when I see those things coming together in a network meeting, it leads to a discovery, and there's a real spiritual discovery that takes place. And all of a sudden, we have discovered together, and we've kind of been sitting in the midst of listening to God's Spirit speak, and we've discovered what God is doing. And we go away from there empowered because it's been a discovery. Let me pull up again, and then I do have something to talk about culture if that's where we want to go. But what pushback? Let me know. What do you think?
I have a question. Do you think that this is possible once a month at a lunch? Because that's pretty much what we're all doing right now.
Yeah, great question. It's possible, but I think there needs to be more extended time if you're going to really do it well. Yeah. And especially if it's, you're meeting in a crowded restaurant and, you're taking 10 or 15 minutes for everybody to say hello, and then you're ordering some food, and then you got 10 or 15 minutes to talk, and the food shows up, and now you're eating, and you're still talking while you're eating, and you're in a crowded restaurant, and you can obviously, and you should pray in a restaurant. There's nothing wrong with praying in a restaurant, but really praying about some things that are important to you, you may not want to do in a crowded restaurant. So my preference, and when we started doing these things years ago, we learned a lot. When we first started doing these kinds of meetings, we were doing them 6 hours at a time. And we started at 9 and went till 3, and it included lunch. That's too long, I think. And unless you've run a really big agenda, some huge thing you're tackling together, you may need 6 hours. If you're, and maybe once a year you do pull off a big long meeting like that. I was with Indiana Baptist yesterday, and we did an all-day meeting, but we had a ton of stuff that we wanted to deal with, and so occasionally, yeah, but most of the time, I think I like doing the ones that have worked well for me have been like a 10 to noon and then we all go to lunch together, kind of thing. 10:30 to noon, where we got an hour and a half or so that we can really deal with some content, share together and pray together, and then go fellowship around a meal. Again, you can say, okay, let's do breakfast and then meet for whatever works best for the schedule for the guys. That answer your question?
Something I would just throw in there was, you were talking about being in a restaurant not necessarily always being the ideal location for some of this type of conversation. We found out in Region 7 it works really well just meeting at a church and bringing lunch in. That especially was helpful when COVID hit because we could still meet together. But I can think of one time a little over a year ago where I just had a really difficult morning going into one of these regional meetings, and I just broke down weeping, and just the guys gathered around me and prayed over me and just encouraged. And I can promise you that would never have happened if we were gathering at a Bob Evans. I would have just kind of kept it inside and acted like everything was all cool. So for us, it has worked really well. Just one of the churches that was central opening up and just bringing food in.
Good. That's good.
I was going to ask a question, Steve.
Sure.
You mentioned the importance of trust, and I absolutely agree with you that trust is critical for this whole process to work. How on earth, though, do we develop trust with other brothers that we only see and interact with on a few hours a month basis? I can understand building trust with church members because we're serving together, we're seeing each other every week, we're praying for one another and engaged with one another. But how on earth in a context like this do we develop trust to be able to see this kind of growth?
That is a great question. And I think, trust again is based on relationship. In my opinion, anything you can do to deepen those relationships. So, I encourage networks to do occasionally, obviously it's not something you do every month, but do occasionally some kind of a trip together. I had a couple networks not long ago that picked out a couple different churches that were in another state that were really doing some things they wanted to learn about. And we loaded up in a van, visited one church one day, spent the night on the road in a hotel, visited the next church the second day. That time in the van, getting to know one another, our trust levels took huge leaps in that little trip together. So you're right. It is a challenge to build trust in a couple hours a month together. But I think you find ways to do things together that help you build that trust, and you find ways to launch into projects together, and it takes time. It's not, trust is something. It's not microwave. It's crock pot. It's got to take time to simmer, and it's got to take time, and so some other things that I've really found that help us build trust is when we worship together. And I don't mean by that we have to sing. Singing can be a part of it. But when we have really come together and we've opened God's word and we've shared from God's word and dialogued around God's word, and we've allowed the Spirit of God to speak into that. So trust can be built that way. That's a step toward trust. I also think that just, the more that a leader, particularly if you're a convener, the more that you're willing, and again, you have to, I know there's cautions here, so don't, but the more as a convener that you're willing to be vulnerable, and the more that you're willing to sometimes, when it's right, to lead with your own stuff, that opens the door for trust building. And I'm not saying that we all come into every meeting and, just turn into bleeding hearts and just gush over everybody. But I'm saying there are times when you've got to be, as a convener, very vulnerable and open so that it gives people permission to be that way. That takes time. I agree with you. It's very difficult in 2 hours a shot. And so you look for other ways to encourage that. That makes sense?
Steve, you model this so well, but at the same time, I think trust. Do you think it involves somebody has to take a risk?
Yeah.
It's probably going to be us, those who are leading the group, rather, that would be vulnerable, like you say. I think it's risky, and maybe we need to learn how to, wade out into that water a little bit, rather than just let's all dive in and talk about something deeply personal. Maybe just wade into that. I can remember a class I took somewhere where it's kind of like it's like an expanding circle, but it's it kind of starts with a little bit of risk, a little bit of, and then you can expand from there. I don't know if that makes sense, but that's my experience with it. Once I open up, the other guy's a lot more willing to open up. Does that make sense?
Yeah, that it does make sense, and I think it's a building. It's a step-by-step thing. It's not something that happens again. It's not microwave. It's got to take time to create. Yeah.
One of the things, Steve, that I was hoping that we could discuss as well, about there being so many different networks available to our pastors now, not just the Southern Baptist tribe, not just the Kaba tribe, but what do we say to pastors that say, well, I'm already so involved in other networks, I don't have time to do this and that as well. How do we develop loyalty? How do we attract comeliness, I guess is the word?
Yeah, and it's great question, Mark. And I think the quick answer, but it's not there's not a way to answer it quickly, but the quick answer is to really ask the value added question. And I also think that crisis, and I'm using that word, challenges maybe is a better, that are created, magnify the need for the local. So here's my illustration. I'm having trouble saying it, so let me see if I can illustrate it and not, when I local pastor that I know whose daughter committed suicide. It was not the national fellowship that he was relating to that showed up at the funeral home and the service. It's like a lady called me one time and said, that her husband had died and she needed some help. And dear sweet lady, and I'm not making fun of her, but she just couldn't, this has been years ago, she just could not understand why Charles Stanley would not send somebody to do her husband's funeral. And she says, I've been watching him for years and I've been sending money to him for years. And this was when I was pastoring in Eastern Kentucky, and my husband died and I told him that, and he didn't send anybody. So again, I'm not being mean about her. I'm not making fun of her. But that's just an illustration. So some networks, I'm part of some national networks. I'm part of the 6-4 Fellowship, which is a great, I meet with those guys and pray with them online. Those can be very valuable. But when it really comes to those push comes to shove kind of things, I need somebody that'll put a face on grace and put flesh on the love of Jesus for me, that'll be there. So that answer your question?
Yeah, thank you. It goes along with what Jonathan was saying about how do you build trust. And some of this is just going to take time and life experiences and that kind of thing. Right now, we can't travel much. And so I know that local networking is at a premium. It is. And that's why we're not meeting in person today. And it's, online right now. Were there some other things you were going to say about, I was thinking maybe some examples as well. I love your stories, examples about different types of huddles and pastor networks and when they get together. I mean, what are some experiences that you've had with those?
Yeah, obviously we've got those going on in different places. Most of our, not most, but I'd say a good chunk of our associations right now have networks meeting, and they all look a little bit differently. When we were doing one in Cleveland for a while, we had laid out a theme of our networks of what it means to finish well. And so each month we came together and we did something every month based around the theme of what it means to finish well. And we had a group of pastors in that network that were very focused. They were all in their mid 50s. And so they were in that mid game and they were asking the question, how are we setting ourselves up to finish well? And so some networks will build around a particular emphasis like that. And that network was set up intentionally for a 9-month period. And so we weren't intending it to be a network that lasted forever. It was a short-term, if you call 9 months short-term, but it was a 9-month kind of network. Then you got networks like, like Steve Long's got going up there in Toledo, where they've been meeting for years, and they have a pretty set pattern. They'll come in and perhaps everybody's read the same book, and they're going to discuss that book. Somebody's going to bring a case study, and they're going to, and then they're going to ask everybody who's got the most intentional. They're going to all number their crisis right now, and whoever's got the highest number, we jump in and deal with it. So those are more long-term and have some real intentional outline to them. So those networks are kind of all over the board in terms of how they're working, but they're all can be very, very good. I have one group of guys that I meet with who are really focused on prayer, and that every time our topic's going to be prayer. We know that, and we're going to pray together. So you can have networks that focus on a topic, and maybe even like your regional networks, which are regional for a reason, because that's the best way for you to get together. That you say, okay, for this, for us, we want to deal. We want to flesh out how to become better preachers in the next 3 months that we meet together. And so we're going to pick out a book on the preaching, and we're going to talk about that, and that's going to be our emphasis. And then after that, we may look at what's the best outreach methods or whatever it might be. So you can pick some themes and go with that at times. Seen that be very effective. And then other times, like I said, there in Toledo, they just come together and figure out what's the biggest need we got right now, and let's deal with it. So.
Right. I think during the building trust side, several of us had talked about the idea of just trying to see what the need were and sort of just recognizing that it's going to take 3 or 4 meetings to get together. Some of our regions have been meeting for years. I mean, they predate anything formally being done across the Cincinnati area. Let me ask one other question. Maybe other guys have some questions as well. A group that's not with us today, but I've heard from, are our bivocational pastors, and being geographically just oriented or whatever, it tends to lean toward the guys that can meet during the day, but the guys that can't meet during the day, we just have a separate network for them? I'm concerned about the Bivo guys.
Yeah, and constant challenge, because it's 50% or more of our pastors in Ohio are bivocational, and that's just true all the way across the board. And
yes, same here in Cincinnati. Yeah.
Yeah, and some guys, and I'm not critical of this. I understand some guys, if their wife was not working a real good job, they wouldn't be surviving. So in essence, they are bivocational. Their wife's the one that's got the insurance for them or something like that, which is sometimes what you got to do. I understand that. So probably higher than 50% are bivocational if you take that into consideration. So here's some things that we've learned in working with bivocational pastors, and I don't have this mastered. I've still got a long way to go. Number one, their time obviously is very, very valuable. And I call them double time pastors. They're working two jobs, and some of them, it's more demanding than others. Some of them have that second job, which has a lot of flexibility. Some it's more demanding. So we got to make sure that when they're meeting, that we add as much value as possible. Because if they really don't, and none of us have time just to sit around and drink coffee, but they really don't have time just to sit around and fellowship. They need fellowship. They want fellowship, but it's got to be built around something that's added value to them. Secondly, here's what I found out with bivocational pastors, and you guys just tell me if this is wrong in your experience, because I don't have the corner on this market. Some of them, it's easier for them to take off a Sunday than to take off a day of work from their quote secular job. And so I've had some bivocational pastors tell me, let's go on a weekend together with bivocational pastors. And we've done that a couple times. It's been mixed success, but and they said, I by nature of being bivocational, I've trained people to preach for me. And I've got people in the church who can fill in, because that's part of the beast of being bivocational. And so they can take off a Sunday. And then the third thing that relates to that is, and it relates to them taking off a Sunday too, is that if any way, shape, or form you can include their family. Because the family is often what gets sacrificed the most in a bivocational home. And if they're going to take time away to do something, unfortunately, too many times it's the family they're taking time away from to do it. And so you got to be really sensitive if there's any way at all to. And so when we've done some bivocational retreats, we've always included the wife, and if at all possible, we've included some kind of arrangements for the children. That's always a challenge, and of course, COVID now has got that even more challenging. But so those are the kind of things that I think of when I think of bivocational guys. I try to think of making sure I'm adding value. I'm making sure I fit their schedule, and then I'm always trying to think about their family and where their family fits into it. And one little other practical thing, I had a bivocational guy tell me this one time, and he said, if I'm going to come to that meeting, it was a meeting on Saturday we were doing, so I'm going to come to that meeting on Saturday, that's my sermon prep time. He says, when I get ready to leave there, hand me an outline I could work on. So I did. I handed him an outline, and I don't know whether he used it or not, but when he walked out the door, I said, here's an outline. You didn't have time this morning to prepare a sermon, work on this and make it your own. And so, I don't know.
Steve, and I can kind of speak to that experience in a way, because over the years, just up until this April, that I basically retired from my secular job. And for all the years past, I've always pastored a church bivocational. And it is difficult for a bivocational to be able to be involved in something like this. Now, if I was still working, I wouldn't be here right now. And the whole idea is to be able to, just like we're talking about, share, network, and so forth. And I know all those years, and even other bivocationals that I had related to through our association, had felt sort of the same way. You kind of feel left out. And that's not just to say that's intentional. You just kind of you feel like you're left out, or you're kind of side of the road, so to speak, because everything is geared, and understandably, to fully funded type of churches and so forth. I know one of the things that I and my wife enjoyed going to a lot was the pastor staff and the wife times that we had together. Of course, that's not anymore, and can't really right now. But that was a great time for us, just like you're talking about, being able to relate to the family, because we could come together with other pastors fully funded or otherwise. And it was a great time to be able to share together and be together, and to know you were part of a group that were intermixed between fully funded and bivocational. But that is something that is really difficult, just from my experience, is to be able to, come to a meeting and be able to get something. And again, I'm not taking away, just like you said, not being critical, to get something substantial. You come to a meeting, you don't have a lot of time. And I never really thought about what you said about the weekend, but those were, even for me, like a Friday night and even a Saturday, Friday night into a Saturday, was great for our capability of being able to be part of it. Because those type of retreats were really great. We could spend maybe a short matter of time, and most of the time those retreats were something substantial as well that was presented. But even the Sunday, I had not really thought about that, because I had taken time myself off for certain different things and had someone come in and fill in for me. But that is important, I think, just from a bivocational standpoint. You see all these other churches getting together, and then you feel kind of side of the road, not intentional, but that's the way it feels sometimes.
Yeah. All right. And Mark, I know we're running tight on time. I got that whole culture issue I promised Dave Frazier, but maybe, I don't know, we need to save that for another time. I don't know what, you tell me what to do. So
we can keep going. I can cut off the recording at any time. If guys need to, leave, they can. But if you've got some closing comments about being a part of, a network that meets together on a regular basis and plugging in, here's your opportunity. Just to give a encouragement to if you were going to say something to any of our pastors, how would you sum up what we've just talked about today?
I think to sum it up is to realize pastoring a church was never intended to be a Lone Ranger endeavor. I think when you read the New Testament, you read how many times Paul is going back and encouraging the leaders of churches, and you see how that, even Paul had his, there's a whole host of people. You just could, start talking about Silas and Barnabas and Timothy and Epaphroditus, and you can go way down the list there of all the people that were involved with Paul and his ministry. And so, and obviously the glaring example is Jesus and his disciples. But I mean, so it's so important for us that we need one another, and we need to be in this, because when we try to do it, when you try to go Lone Ranger, that's when you really open the door for the enemy. Every pastor I know, and I don't know them all, and you guys may know some illustrations that don't fit this, every pastor I know who has experienced a tremendous moral failure or some other type of failure like that have separated themselves and before that, and have been trying to do it alone, and they've built walls around themselves, not allowed anybody to speak into their lives. And the ones that I've dealt with, which again, I haven't dealt with everybody, but the ones that I've dealt with afterwards have said to me, I just wish I'd have had somebody who could have sensed what was going on in my heart and told me that I needed to make some changes. And every one of them said, I just had closed everybody out, and I was doing it by myself. And that opened the door for the failure that I experienced. So I just can't emphasize enough how important that is, that we build those kinds of relationships.
Steve, thanks for being with us. We've been with Steve Hopkins, who is the resource group leader for the Bible Teaching Leadership Resource Group at the State Convention of Baptists in Ohio. Steve, I assume that you are available to anybody that would like to email you. What's your email address, just real quick, or what's the best way to contact you for follow-up?
Sure. It's Steve Hopkins, no periods or anything, just Steve Hopkins at scbo.org, State Convention Baptist Ohio.org. And then, don't hesitate, send me an email, let me know. And if we need a phone call, or I'm, down in your area as often as I can, and meet together and talk, be happy to do that. Yeah.
Yeah, Steve's done a couple of transitional pastorates for us here in the Cincinnati area, and appreciate what you've done at Mount Carmel and at First Baptist Mason, and you probably have done others I just don't know about, but thank you. That's since I've been here. But we appreciate you being here today, and let me stop the recording.